port tuning. What I kind of want to go over and get across here is port size equals resistance and ports effects on the box. What I first want you to kind of get in your head here first is think of a speaker in a free air application, how much resistance is put on that speaker when your amplifier is hooked up to it. At that point, you have no resistance applied back to the speaker at that point, and your amplifier is able to deliver all the force to it at that point. Once you put it in a box, therefore, say we're putting it in a sealed, like I said before, with a higher internal pressure on a smaller box, and then the larger you go with the lower pressure, you're going to have a lower box rise. On a sealed, though, with no output, you're going to have a higher rise. As you add openings, as the free air application more comes into play, you're going to have a lower box rise on your box because you have less force applied back on your speaker. The smaller you go, you're going to have more force going more towards that sealed box application that you're going to have back on your speaker. What I kind of want to go over real quick is some loading issues that we're going to see here. Now, what this is here is this: we have a common L port that you'll see in a lot of boxes. Now, in this box, we have two stubs on a common L port. Now, there's a problem with this, and what this is we have a loading issue here. Why do we have a loading issue? Is because this speaker right here, the front one, is seeing a different loading than the second one. It is further distance back and different than the second one as far as its port and where it's at. Why does that matter? Well, when the amplifier is delivering its power, each sub will essentially be seeing a little bit different power. Does that matter if they're way under power? Not really, probably. You'll have a couple different maybe issues as far as a little bit out of phase and whatnot. If you really don't care for a normal average person or whatnot, you may not have any issues or whatnot. You may say, who cares? But here's another thing to keep in mind here. What this is you may not be able to see this, but this is, say, for instance, a 6-inch port here, and you have 6 inches of port. You ask, where do you stop on your back wall on the inside of your box? Most would say, for dynamic reasons, you'd want to stay 6 inches from the back of your box and keep a fluent transition of 6 inches if that's the size of your port. Now I want to go over box placement and some loading issues. First of all, before we go over that, I want you to think water. Why? Because air and fluids are looked at and measured a lot of times kind of the same way. That's the way they're looked at because of how they react. That's why when a lot of people ask common or L port, not common, but a straight port versus an L port, back where I was asking on that last loading issue question there, why I'll say a straight port any day, because in fluid and air transfer, the less bends that you have as possible, the less resistance you're going to have any and every day. That's why in placement, as far as if you think water dynamics here, in garden hose, your output flow pipe is pretty much, for the most part, straight all the time, right at the end there. Now, once you go opening that pipe, if you go opening that pipe, you're therefore going to have a loss of pressure. And essentially, your pressure, depending on where your port is, you're not going to have any pressure. You're going to have pressure drive for so long before you have a loss of intensity. That's why if a lot of times, depending on your power, you might as well just load as close as your port. As far as if you have a port of 6 inches, it's better to place your box roughly around that 6-inch mark. Is going to be your main best part of placement, I should say, anyhow, for most stories. Now, that's all dependent on power, don't get me wrong. If you think of a garden hose with flow, if you have a very, very strong flow, your flow is going to go a lot further, obviously. So that's going to be relative on how much power you have. That's not going to be, you know, an exact science, I'm sorry. But if, for most applications, your size of your port is going to, for the most part, be your distance that you're going to be best for loading. That's exactly what this picture I'm trying to get across here that you may not be able to see. Kind of the next thing I want to go over real quick. Amplifier ratings, usage, and power. Ratings given by amps are usually given at the RMS free or no resistance just wiring setup. Like I said earlier, when I first started out, I was getting roughly below 2,000 watts off of an 8,000 watt amplifier. I was doing that because I had two separate boxes, and I had two separate boxes that had two 6-inch ports on them. Each 6-inch port was causing me 4 ohms of resistance on each box, plus my 1 ohms of wiring. So what did I have? I had one box that had 4 ohms wired to another box that equaled 4 ohms, plus my wiring that equaled 1 ohm. Now my amplifier was rated at 4,000 watts at 4 ohms. If I can achieve 4 ohms. Now what did I have here? I have an equivalency of 9 ohms. If you do the math, it did equal essentially what I was getting out of that. When I put my box together into a common chamber box to create a 4 ohm box plus my 1 ohm wiring, I did get 5 ohms clamped and was receiving the power, what the book said, at roughly 5 ohms. When I built another box and started getting to that lower BoxRise of 1.5 ohms, and I wired to 1 ohms with a 2.5 ohm BoxRise, I was getting roughly in the book what it said for 2.5 ohms. I hope you understand that now, by what I mean by that. I do want to send out a warning. I want you to understand that these amplifiers are essentially kind of like humans, and what I mean by that is, what is your max bench? Whatever that max bench may be, a person doesn't ask you to do that on a regular basis, whereas if you take your max bench and divide that in half, you're more likely to be able to do that for a lot longer time before your muscles fail. Whereas a max bench, you're only going to get 1 or 2 max benches before your muscles burn out on you and they have failed for you. So please do not wire and achieve a low BoxRise and expect for your amplifier to be able to run like that and not blow up. Especially if you do not have the electrical components to back it up.